So for me, my favorite buddy cop franchise is the Lethal Weapon series. So today we're going to stop and rank all 4 Lethal Weapon movies from the worst to the best. Now, before I get started, go ahead and tell me down below in the comment section, how do you rank the Lethal Weapon movies? Which ones do you love? Which ones do you hate? And everything in between. And if you want to throw the TV show in there and your thoughts on it, go ahead and do that as well. But let's just have a nice, lively discussion. So as for me, I actually do watch the TV show. I'm not quite finished with the 2nd season just yet, but it's good enough. Not something that I'm like highly recommending to you, but it's something I've had enough fun with. With that said, let's start looking at how the critics have ranked the Lethal Weapon movies. In 4th place is Lethal Weapon 4 with 52%. In 3rd place is Lethal Weapon 3 with 57%. But tied for 1st place is Lethal Weapon 1 and 2 with 83%. If you count the number of critics that factor into it, Lethal Weapon 1 does beat out Lethal Weapon 2 using that criteria. So not terribly surprising. It's one of those franchises that a lot of people really love the first 2, and then there's a little bit of dwindling quality in the latter entries in the series. With that said, what do I think about it? Let's dive into this. Coming in last place for me is going to be Lethal Weapon 3. Now, this movie still has the fun, the charm with all the chemistry of the cast and everything, but the story in the first 45 minutes of this movie is a total mess. It feels a little bit like, to me, like the game you do in improv class where one person starts a scene and then they pass it to the next person and that person kind of does their own scene. They didn't like cooperate with each other, and then they pass it on to the next person. The next person kind of continues the scene and they direct where the story's going. That's what this movie kind of feels like, because it starts off with the sequence where Riggs decides to dismantle a bomb and it blows up the building, so they become beat cops because of that. And then they do this thing where they're like harassing someone on the street, and then like a chase breaks out involving the main story of the movie, and then by 35 minutes into it they get their badges back, and so they're not beat cops anymore, and it's just like going all over the place. I mean, just a total jumbled mess. As you move into the second half of the movie, and in particular as Riggs starts interacting more with Lorna, things get a lot better and it tightens up. The story gets more focused and you can see what they were trying to do with the movie. In particular, I think Rene Russo is a very nice addition to the cast to kind of give Riggs an arc throughout these movies, from going from suicidal guy in the first movie to by this one, he's coming back to life and there's a new lady potentially in his life. I think all of that works really nicely. And so it's a movie that I think starts very weak. It's just even that opening sequence, the idea that Riggs would decide to become the bomb squad and would blow up a building and wouldn't then be charged. I mean, I get it. These are dumb 80s action movies. I mean, obviously this one came out in the 90s, but they're dumb 80s action movies that you have to suspend disbelief. This isn't how the police work. You can't just gun guys down like they do. But there's a certain point in time where if a police officer went into a place where there's a bomb and decided, I'll just dismantle this, and then blows up the building, there's big consequences. Like, it just pulls me. Every time I rewatch this, I was like, really? This is how this movie starts? Ugh. This is not a good way to start a movie, but it gets better as it goes along. And by the end of it, I was satisfied enough with it. Coming in 3rd place is going to be Lethal Weapon 4. Now, I think this movie, while not as great as the first 2 movies in this franchise, does a good job of closing out the journey of Riggs and Murtaugh. Especially with Riggs, as I just mentioned, where you start him off as this guy that's suicidal, and by this one, he has a new family. And that becomes very much the theme of this movie, of family. And Riggs has come all the way around to having a family through his friends, as well as now with Lorna. They have their own little family that they're starting in this one. And I think that's very satisfying what they do with that. Also, deciding to get Jet Li as the main villain in this one, I think was a very smart move, especially at that point in time. There was Jackie Chan was coming over, Jet Li was coming over, Chow Yun-fat was coming over. So there's a lot of things like that where Asian action stars were making their rise, and this was a piece of that. And so just a nice, formidable foe for them that, while not like just immediately looking physically imposing, can beat the crap out of the two. So that was a nice little touch to the movie. There's definitely a number of just great action sequences because Jet Li's in it. But just aside from that, there's chase sequences in it where they're in a mobile home on a freeway driving down the road. Just a cool little sequence in the movie that works really nicely. Once again, each of these movies, they decided to add someone new into the mix. Chris Rock as the secret family member in the bunch. It works really nicely because he's Chris Rock, so he's funny. You put him with Joe Pesci. They have a weird chemistry between the two of them as they bicker back and forth and have nothing in common, but somehow have things in common. That worked pretty nicely in this movie. Now, the thing where this movie kind of gets dragged down probably the most for me is rewatching it recently there's some humor in it that kind of goes so far into the racist territory of like, oh yeah, that's how movies used to be, and they would say things and do things and just kind of offhandedly make these remarks that you go, our lead characters are kind of racist in this movie, and kind of awkward, especially in light of where Mel Gibson found himself about 10 years after this movie came out. A little bit off-putting with the time machine type things of watching movies later on. But in general, as an action movie, it has the chemistry, it's got the action sequences, it has a nice faux in the mix, a different type of story from what we saw in the previous entries. So all in all, I think this is a strong closing entry in this franchise. But from this one, there's going to be a big leap up as I move into my top two, and they're neck and neck. One of them is a little bit more dramatic, one a little bit more fun. I go back and forth as to which one is my top one. So when I say which one is where, if you get worked up like, how dare you put that one in the first spot and this one in this, if you're going to start doing all that stuff, I don't have a response for you, because next week if I made this video, I would swap the two of them, because it just depends on what kind of mood I am, because they're both very good movies in my mind that do different things a little bit better than the other. Coming in second place is going to be Lethal Weapon 1. Now this in a lot of ways is kind of the definitive buddy cop drama, because it's a very serious movie. As you have Riggs is suicidal and trying to die for the first half of this movie. He's talking about how he wants to die for the first half of this movie, and he's being pulled out of this. He's being pulled out of the despair and the loneliness as you go through the movie. And you have this Shane Black dark sense of humor in the movie, but it's easily the darkest of all these movies and has the least humor. The humor's in there, but it's not as overt as you get into all the other movies in the franchise. And so thematically, it gets pretty heavy when you have a girl hopped up on drugs, jumping out of a window in your opening scene of the movie, and then you have her dad kind of revealing that she got into porn, and it's pretty dark, gritty type storytelling in this one. And that's what makes it interesting and unique, is that it takes a much more serious take on all these subject matter. Add in the mix someone like Gary Busey as a villain in the mix. It makes for a nice little touch to it. One of the nice little things that's interesting about this movie is the final fight in it. They got the Gracie family of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to choreograph kind of the final fight in it with what Riggs is doing. And you hadn't seen a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and these sorts of locks and stuff in movies prior to the end of this movie. Now, you can barely see it in this movie because of the way Richard Donner shot it with the nighttime and the backlighting and everything like that. But in the other sense, these guys that popularized Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the United States and started the UFC, they were popularizing somewhat in this movie. Where this one for me, I dock it a little bit, is there's elements in it. There's some scenes with some bad acting with like the kids where they're talking to Alfred. The acting there just seems very like they only had one take for the scene or something like that. It doesn't seem up to par with the rest of the movie. And then some of the storytelling feels a little bit jumpy in the way it's cut together. And this is a movie that has a lot of deleted scenes. There's been kind of different releases of it with director's cuts with 10 minutes added, 15 minutes added. And it feels a little bit like the movie was constructed and finalized in the editing room. When that happens, there's problems that can ensue with that. And I think you feel that and you see that in this movie. And that's why for me, I knocked it down just a little bit. And it probably would be number one if there weren't some of these scenes and these moments that just don't flow as smoothly for me. But coming in first place for me, our winner is Lethal Weapon 2. For me, this is when the franchise was just in full steam ahead, all firing on all cylinders. It had the drama, it had some weight to it, but it was also just an absolute blast. And this is one of those sequels that just takes what worked on the original one and extends the themes and kind of continues it to that next level. And that's what this movie is, just from beginning to end, a ton of fun. Just right out of the gate, you have this insane car chase through the city, establishing the themes, the characters, what's kind of going on. And all the way from there until the end of the movie, it just kind of keeps on going. As you go through the movie, there's stakes as police officers actually kind of get blown to pieces and they're getting killed and taken out. There's all these kind of scenes in this movie that maybe it's because it's one of the first rated R movies that I ever saw, but just so planted in my mind of Murtaugh on the toilet, the fight where Murtaugh takes a guy out with a nail gun. Like, I actually remember being in the second grade on a flag football team, and some guy on my flag football team in the second grade was like, oh, I got to see Lethal Weapon 2, and this guy was taking guys out with a nail gun. I was like, I've got to see that movie. So as quickly as I could, as an 8 or 9 year old, whatever I was, watch the movie. So that scenes like that, the shoulder, dislocating the shoulder scene, the main bad guy, the apartheid guy going, diplomatic immunity, the scene where you have Joe Pesci, who's a wonderful addition to the mix, going in with Murtaugh into try and move to South Africa, and the guy goes, but you're black. I mean, just like all these great, amazing, memorable scenes in the movie. The scene where they're pulling off the rooftop or building down with the truck. So many memorable, fun, exciting action sequences. Just for me, this is the definitive fun buddy cop action movie. The second one was a little more, or first one was more on the dramatic side. This is the one on the fun side. So for me, I just inches out that first one because I just have fewer problems with it. So it becomes my #1 pick in the Lethal Weapon series. How about you? How do you rank the Lethal Weapon movies? Tell me down below in the comment section. Which ones do you love? Which ones do you hate? Everything in between. And tell me about the TV show if you happen to check it out. I know a lot of people have really enjoyed it because it's going into its 3rd season, and other people have just thought it was a total cash grab, watered down version of the movies, which it kind of is. With all that said, if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos, but the key thing is I don't want to just talk about movies, I want to talk about movies with you. So join me down in the comment section. Let's have a lively discussion. If you've already clicked that subscribe button, ring that bell so you get notifications whenever I put out new videos. And as always, thank you for watching.